Hey everyone, and welcome to a new episode of the Study Chronicles. Last episode, we covered the hijack versus the big blind. For this episode, we're going to cover late position versus the big blind. So we're going to go over more specifically the cutoff versus the big blind. Now, this is a very important scenario. It is similar to the button versus big blind, but each single raise pot with each position, I wanted to go into more detail because they are a higher priority in the spot importance spreadsheet. So if we take a look at the spot importance spreadsheet that we've been using, you can see that the top 4 high priority positions are going to be button versus big blind, small blind versus big blind, hijack versus big blind, and cutoff versus big blind. So these are the more frequent scenarios. Also, you could include under the gun versus big blind. That is going to play very similarly to the hijack versus big blind. And it's going to be a slightly less frequent scenario, but still very important. So I figured for the future of this series, I'm going to do each individual high priority scenario. And then as time goes on, I am going to group the medium priority stuff. So instead of being very thorough and very specific about each individual spot versus another spot, we're going to group early position and late position. So for example, button versus the big blind 3-bet pot, we're going to group that with button versus a small blind 3-bet pot. So we're going to streamline the rest of this so that I don't give you guys 22 videos to watch, but rather something around the ballpark of 10 videos I think would be great for this series. So that's the plans for the future scenarios. For this video, we're going to continue the high priority cutoff versus big blind. So let's get into it. I already got GTO Wizard opened up here. I'm going to go over the opening ranges for the cutoff. We're again using the NL500 GTO ranges. You can have different opening sizes from the cutoff. I do see a lot of different strategies from the cutoff. Some players like to min raise, some players like to 2.5x, some players even like to 3x the cutoff. So depending on the opening range, you'll have to look through some of the solutions and tweak some ranges here and there. But for the most part, opening 2.3, 2.4, 2.5, whatever it is, it's all going to be very similar. So we have the opening range here in the rake structure for the 500 NL. And you can see that the bottom of range is going to include hands like ace 8 offsuit, queen 5 suited. Low pocket pairs are going to be mixing and open. So you can see down here, pocket 2s isn't opening 100%. But if you play in a lower raked game, you're going to see this go to 100%, and you might see some wider hands be included. So keeping that in mind, we also have hands like ace 5 offsuit at a very small frequency. You know, you can choose to just probably not open this one. It's not going to be a big difference in your win rate. But if you do notice that the small blind and big blind are over folding, then you want to start including a lot more of these types of hands, and even maybe something like a7, a6 offsuit, queen 9 offsuit, etc. So opening up your range depending on how other players play. But if you want to stick to a more equilibrium type of strategy, then this is going to be your answer here. So other hands that are weak include king 3 suited, 10-7 suited. So hands that have strong suited connectors or 2-gappers. And then the offsuit, you know, broadways, of course, down to even some of the offsuit jack 9, jack 10. These hands, or 10-9, sorry. These hands are, you know, close, but again, you should be opening some of this stuff. It's important to be winning the blinds. So if we do open as the cutoff, the big blind is going to defend here with a lot of different strategies. So again, some players are going to use a 10 big blind 3-bet. Some players are going to use a 13 big blind 3-bet. Some players are going to use a 15 big blind 3-bet. There's a lot of strategies you can employ out of the big blind. I personally like to follow this 13.5 big blind 3-bet. It is on the bigger side, which means you can include a lot of polar hands like queen 4 suited, Hands like king deuce suited, these are all going to be mixed 3-bets out of the big blind. The idea obviously is that you remove some of the stronger pairs and the stronger hands when you have a king, queen, or ace. So you see a lot of this grouping here be a weak 3-bet out of position. And then you have some of the offsuit Broadways over here, which do the same thing. They remove the strong hands, but also have some decent playability. And then you have your suited connectors, your low suited connectors, 5-4 suited all the way up to ace-king suited, with a little bit of an emphasis on calling king, queen, and queen, jack. This just has something to do with playability. Out of position, you're going to dominate a lot of the cutoffs opening range with king, queen suited, queen, jack suited. As a general rule, if there's no gap in your hand, it's going to play better as a call to some extent, because obviously you can flop stronger with open-ended straight draws and gut shots and stuff like that. And you're also going to have a better kicker when you have a jack with your queen, or if you have a king with your queen, instead of having something like jack 10, right? So there's some elements at play here for flatting, but most of the time you're going to be mixing most of these hands as a 3-bet. Tens plus is the pair threshold to which you want to be 3-betting for value. Everything else is usually going to be flatting. If you lower the 3-bet size, you can start including some weaker pairs in your 3-bet. So that's going to be a theme among most 3-betting scenarios, where if you size down, you can 3-bet a little more linear. If you size up, you can 3-bet more polar and include some of these weaker, hands in this section over here. So that's going to be the response from the big blinds. Let's get into some of the drills, shall we? So I'm going to pull up again from the spot importance sheet. We're going to start talking about some heuristics. So cutoff versus big blind. I'm going to just click this drill right here. It should bring up the trainer. We're going to make sure that we're playing our solution for this, which is the general NL 500, post flop included, 6 max classic. That looks good. We're going to play 100 big blinds. Opening size is GTO. So that looks good there. For the custom settings, we don't need any of that. So we're just going to confirm that. And then I want to put in the low RNG. That's what I like to use. We have the session. We're going to try and put in 20 hands today. Maybe it'll go over or maybe it'll go under, but we'll aim for 20 for today. Game speed. Honestly, you could always just put this on turbo. I don't think it really makes a big difference, but turbo or fast, both are going to be fine. And I think that looks good. So we should play from both sides of the scenario, meaning we're going to play out of the big blind and we're going to play out of the cutoff. So we'll look at both sides for all of that information. So right away we get dealt in the cutoff. What I like to do is immediately look at the aggregated reports. As you guys know, I'm a big fan of the aggregated reports. Gives you the bird's eye view of all of your strategy and what you're going to do out of the cutoff versus the big blind in a single raise pot. So if we go over to the reports tab, it's important to note that you're not always going to get an aggregated report for your solution. Not all of the solutions have aggregated reports. They did just add in customized aggregated reports. So you can now make an aggregated report for any solution if you so choose. But if you're using the pre-solve library, then you have to make sure that you actually have the aggregated reports for that solution. It's one of the main reasons I actually really use the GTO solutions, is because they have all of the aggregated reports for them. So it's very helpful for me. So looking at them, you have a check for 41%. So that means we're going to be betting about 60% of the time. And you can see that that is split between the 4 sizings. So as you guys know, I like to use a lot of sizings, 4 to be exact when it comes to single raise pots in position. I have a small, a medium, a large, and an overbet. They all serve a different purpose, but you can see that we are going to mix depending on the textures. So as we've talked about in previous episodes, you're going to have a smaller sizing for the weaker parts of your range, also balanced, of course, with some stronger hands. But you're going to have your medium size for your medium bets and your large size for your strong hands and your overbets for your very polar range as a general rule of thumb. So looking at this, 40% check, 7% overbets. Our most common sizing is going to be small, followed by medium. So if I ever get confused in a spot or I'm not sure what to do, betting small or medium is probably not going to be a big blunder. So just keeping that in mind. So first scenario, King 10-6 board. We have Ace 8 suited from the cutoff. What am I going to do here? Well, first I'm going to look at my RNG. It's a 73, so that's a pretty high number, which means I want to take a more passive line. So either small betting or checking. Ace 8 suited. This is one of those hands that this is actually a tough spot because this is borderline showdown bound, but not strong enough. So a board texture like King 10-6 is going to be in our favor. I would assume we would c-bet this at a higher frequency than the global. So I would assume we're probably c-betting here like 70% of the time. If I had to guess, 73 is not quite good enough. I'm going to check here this time. So check. Jack of diamonds turn. So again, we can kind of start thinking about a bet on the turn here. A quick heuristic to talk about is when you do miss a flop c-bet, you're going to have a specific strategy on the turn. So some people call this a delay c-bet, but if you do check back in position in the cutoff and the turn is, let's say, for example, the Jack of diamonds this time, you're going to see a variety of strategies for each different turn. So the thing that drives your strategy on the turn is going to be range versus range, but also what is that turn? How does your range want to proceed given this turn card? So you can see the big blind is mostly still checking. And then when it comes back to us, we're going to have a few options. We're going to have small, we're going to have medium, and then a light amount of large and overbet. 1 sec, let me let Hazel out. There we go. Sorry. So this is going to be the most common delay c-bet strategy where you mostly have a small and medium sizing. If we change this turn to a brick card, let's say a 3, then you might see some more overbetting occur. So you can see some 175 sneaking in there and the frequency of overbet and large bet goes up. This is because sometimes we're just going to check back some strong hands on the flop that are going to get to the turn and still want to be putting in a lot of money. So let's say we checked back something like King Queen at a frequency, which is probably fine. If we have King Queen of diamonds, sometimes you're going to see a check and then we get to the turn. Well, that now might want to go for the overbet sizing on the turn because it's a really strong hand. Villains shouldn't have any ace king in their range pre-flop. So King Queen is one of the better hands to now overbet the turn. And we know that because, we were just looking at it. But it's one of those things where it should be somewhat intuitive to play turn. So on this specific turn, this is not a brick. This is a card in which you're going to have mostly a medium and small sizing, less polarized, if you will. It's also harder to get value from weaker hands when the board texture has a straight out there, right? So if we did use an overbet sizing here, it's going to be very polar and it's going to be targeting a strong hand from villain, right? This one is, again, I'm unsure, honestly. This is a tricky spot, but I'm going to go with a check or probably a medium or small bet. Check is never going to be wrong, so I know I'm just going to go with the check this time. And then versus a small bet, I think we can just fold here. Villain should have a lot of like Jack X here for the small sizing. I think we're just going to fold. 10x, that's, the next best hand, obviously. Ace 10. But I do want to look at what the turn strat could have been for my hand. I could have bet small on turn or medium, basically targeting those weak underpairs that are just going to have to fold to the small bets. Okay, next hand. So this time we're on the other side of the coin. ace 10 of spades out of position versus cutoff, we're always going to check this flop. We will have some leads. I think I talked about this before in the other videos. Out of the big blind, it's going to be the same thing. We're going to mostly lead those board textures that hit the big blind well. Board textures like 654, 762, not 762, sorry, 763, things like that. So on the turn, king on the turn. So again, talking about how the turn affects, your strategy. This is a good turn for villain. They're going to have a lot more ace king than us. In fact, I don't think we have any ace king out of the big blind versus cutoff in a single raise pot. So they're going to have really strong hands on the turn. King queen is probably going to be in their range more because we're 3-betting that at a frequency, right? Especially king queen suited. So I think this is going to be a very polar strategy where I'm either large betting or over betting. This particular hand probably could do either. I could also check. I lean towards overbet here because if they did check back the flop with something like pocket jacks, well, what are they going to do facing an overbet, right? It's a pretty uncomfortable spot if you have an underpair to the queen. I'm going to try this overbet. I might even be meant to 250 bet, but I'm going to try overbet. Check or overbet. They're both going to be good. I think. Nope. No overbet. Okay. River is going to be a check. This is a bad hand to bluff because we are blocking the weak floats of villain. We are blocking ace king though. So there is some value in bluffing this hand. We're also blocking king 10 of spades. I have to imagine there's worse hands to bluff here though. Yeah. So villain showed queen 9. So let's see what happened on the turn. Why was I wrong for overbetting the turn there? Okay. So there were some overbets, and like I did mention, I don't know if I'm blocking that with my head, but let me move my camera for a quick second. There you go. So you can actually see the circled part where there is a 250% bet. So there was an overbet. It just wanted to go really, really big and polar with an ace 10 of spades type of hand. And that's because ace 10 of spades is probably like threshold for checking because it has some showdown value. So it almost maybe prefers a check call or a check raise. So if we're going to turn it into a semi bluff, we're going to go real big and target some stronger hands, like maybe even some queens that check back the flop. Because we have such good blocking properties of the turned king with blocking ace king, with blocking king 10. And also if they ever check back ace queen, we're blocking that. So this is one of those spots where if we're going to go for it, we're going to go really big. And it makes sense. So I missed the really big overbet size. It's not going to be a big mistake. You can see the difference is only 0.02 EV. But it is theoretically, a mistake. So let's get into the next hand. And I'll bring my camera back here. There we go. King 8-7 in the cutoff. Again, this is one of those spots. I think we're going to be c-betting slightly more than average. We rolled low, so I could see betting small. I could see betting medium. Maybe large on a king 8-7 board. So typically villain's going to have most of the 8s and 7s in their range, which makes me think I don't want to overbet this hand that often. And I could go for the smaller medium bets. I know for a fact small bet's going to be okay. But let's try medium. Let's try and mix it up. Or let's try large even, because this is a really low number. And so I think if I do have an aggressive large bet size, this one isn't that bad with the backdoor hearts and overcard. So nice. We found the right play there. Out of curiosity, can I overbet the flop? It's possible. I don't think it's going to be common. Yeah, 2.7% of the time. Very, very low frequency. But finding that large bet was good in that spot. All right. Now we're out of position here. 994 board. We're always going to check. Maybe not always. There was a 5.8% check there, or 5.7% check there. 994 is going to be a board texture which we check raise a lot post flop. Paired boards typically are higher frequency check raises. This one is obvious for value, so I think I'm going to go with a raise here. After we raise on a paired board, I think I have a few options. I think we have medium, large. I'm not sure if we have an overbet on a paired board, but if we're repping a 9, it would make sense to have this overbet, especially a hand like King 9, which is really high up in our range. So I could see this being split between large and overbet. Let's take a gamble and use the overbet. I think large is the safe choice, but yeah, overbet's not really a thing. I was thinking I could get it in over 3 streets, but now it's a little wonky, although we still are blocking. Yeah, I think if we're going to do anything, it's probably just jam if we overbet the turn. And we do stack Jack 9, but we made a couple of mistakes there. So let's take a quick look. So the first mistake, as I was mentioning, I knew overbet would be a gamble there. I wasn't certain about it. The most common strategy on a paired board is half pot and large, so medium and large sizing. And that's just because when you're repping trips, you're very polar. You don't need to be like denying equity. If they have a medium strength hand, you don't want to blast them off of it with an overbet. And so, yeah, a half pot large size would have been standard there. And then on the river, if I do overbet, it looks like 60% bet is the better choice. And that's just because at this stage, if I do overbet, I'm essentially repping a full house at that point, right? So if I don't have a full house on the river and there's a lot of cards that can easily give me a full house, it doesn't make sense to use my King 9 as a jam on the river. Instead, I would use something like 9-10, 9-queen, pocket fours, 9-9, right? Those are the types of hands that I would use if I was going to overbet turn and then jam river. So a little bit of a mistake there on the turn and also on the river. All right. Let's look at the next one. King flop. This one I think is going to be a pretty high frequency C bet. I rolled a low number. I can probably bet medium or small. Going to go for the small bet this time. King 7-4. So this is actually a pretty cool spot, which is a little hard for some players to get right, including myself. But whenever you get to the turn with an air hand, so a no-made hand, you want to make sure that you have good removal effects if you're going to bet the turn. So this hand is actually not a terrible candidate because it's blocking the strongest part of villain's big blind calling range, which is king queen. Okay, so it's blocking the best possible trips for villain, and it's also blocking some of the weaker king X hands that have king 8 suited. Right, king 8 suited is going to be a defense here, so the 8 of clubs is more relevant than something like the 8 of hearts. If I had the 8 of hearts, that would not be removing king 8 offsuit because they don't have that for defending the big blind. So the fact that my hand is clubs is a good candidate for a no-made hand to turn it into a bluff. The second thing is that an 8 is blocking pocket 8s, which is a pretty good hand for big blind for defending across 2 streets here. So there is actually some really good removal effects happening despite us not having much equity. And the third thing is if we do get called on the turn, they're still going to have some underpairs to the king that we have overcards too. So if they do check call twice here with something like 7-6 of spades, we have 2 cards that we could hit, an 8 or a queen, to then win the pot. So there is some advantages of taking this no-made hand and betting turn. That being said, I don't think we should just be firing this 100% of the time because we have a lot of no-made hands on the turn. So we have to be careful not to over bluff on the turn here. I rolled a 62, which means semi-passive kind of line here. So I think I could either bet large or check with a hand like this. There might even be some overbetting, surprisingly, but I'm going to check. I know that this is the safe option, but I do think betting turn is not a bad play there. I river a queen. I don't think this is good enough for value, but they did have exactly that kind of hand I was mentioning, like 7-6 suited, where we had two overs. We hit the river card. That was a very good example. Looking back at the turn strategy, let's look at the turn strategy. And you can see that, in fact, the solver does want to throw in some medium or large bets, which is what I would have done. I would have went for the large sizing on the turn if I did select a sizing. And the fun thing about this hand is that you probably are going to triple barrel this hand. You don't have much showdown. You have good removal effects. So if we did bet the turn here, let's take a quick look. Let's say we did bet the turn for the 75 sizing and we get to the river, and the river is, let's say, an offsuit deuce, right? I think we'll see a lot of over betting from queen 8. So if you look at queen 8 of clubs, you'll see, again, maybe my head's blocking this. No, you can see it. But you can actually see sometimes the solver is even jamming 4x pot here. And that's exactly what I was mentioning before. We're literally blocking the best trips combo from villain. So this is a really strong hand to bluff with, and you actually see the solver just ripping it in for 4x pot with queen 8 high. Now, let me know in the chat or the comments section if you've ever done something like this before, because this is kind of what separates some of the more knowledgeable players from the more passive players that aren't going to find some of these bluffs, is that they're willing to jam 4x pot on the river with queen high. So it's a pretty cool spot to find, and it does come up a decent amount of the time when you get to the turn with no made hand. It's important to really think about your removal effects. The best possible bluff here, in fact, is like a queen high type of hand that removes some of those stronger king queen combos for jamming. So we're also going to jam something like 7s, something like 4s, something like ace king for value. So that's how the solver is going to balance that scenario. Okay, going back to the big blind, out of position, ace, queen, 10 board. We're never leading this. Villain should be betting this at a high frequency. We have third pair. Third pair is not very good on a texture like this. It wouldn't surprise me if we were actually folding third pair, because it's hard to realize equity out of position on a 3 Broadway board. We don't even have the flush draw covered with our 9. This is probably threshold for continuing. I think I would normally call here, but I'm not sure. This could be a mistake. So let's try call. Yeah, 0% call. It doesn't surprise me after exactly everything I just told you guys, but it is too wide to defend here out of position. So gonna check turn, and then if we do get to the river with this hand, it wouldn't be such a bad spot to probably bluff our hand. But yeah, the flop check call is definitely going to be too wide. And you can see here it's 100% fold, and we're losing 0.13 EV, which is significant. So careful about defending out of position on those Broadway textures, especially if there's a flush draw out there. All right, in position, cutoff versus big blind now, king 10-4. We actually have a pretty strong hand in terms of equity. The problem with this hand is we're not really looking to bet 3 streets unless we turn the spade. So I think bet small is probably not a bad option. I think check is going to be the most common option. I did roll an aggressive number here, so I RNG lower for aggression, if you guys didn't know that by now. But I am going to go and put a small bet in here at a small frequency. And then once villain calls, this is a really good hand to check back, unless I'm turning my hand into a bluff at this stage, which could be a thing. I think we'd rather use something a little weaker. Could I use this hand as a bluff? You know, it wouldn't be that bad to bluff the turn here if I can get a weak king to fold. I think this hand's either going to... Shoot, should I overbet if I'm bluffing? Large bet? I think I'm either going to large bet or check, but I think the safe play is check, and I would check in game. But just considering the idea of turning second pair into a bluff on the flop, you know, it's always good to think about it. Oh, look at that. There was a check there. I mean, there was a bet there. We get to the river. River the second nut flush. We have a blocker to the boat. I don't think we can raise river. I think we're just going to call. Yeah. But yeah, there was a turn bet there, and I don't think that was... It might have been for value. It's really close, though. Let's see. What did it want to do on the turn? The flop was check or bet. Turn was, in fact, half pot, small bet, or a check. So that's kind of one of those spots where you have third pair, but you have a really strong kicker. So it is like a semi-bluff to some extent. Like villain has to fold something maybe like the weakest king X in his range. I don't know. Maybe some stronger 10X. So there's somewhat of a bluffing property going on there, but it is like it is kind of a mergy bluff on the bet on the turn, I should say. If you want to find out whether or not the solver is likely bluffing the hand, there's two things you should do. One, look at the equity buckets on the turn and see which hand category it falls under. So if we look at the cutoff range and we look at the equity buckets down here, you'll see you can click the best hands and see if your hand is in the best hands. So is Queen 10 in the best hands? No. Is it in a good hand? Yes. So it's in a good hand category, which is likely a value bet. And then you can then look at the equity and see, is this closer to a weak hand or is this closer to a best hand? So 52% equity is actually a pretty strong hand here. And that signifies that the solver is likely betting this hand for value, right? So it's not going to be a bluff. It's going to be a value bet, a very thin value bet. But villain can call the turn with worse hands, and then we can check back the river. And if we do hit a spade on the river, we now have the second nuts. So there's a lot of good things that can happen when you merge a hand like this. You probably won't see very many merges without the queen of spades or the ace of spades, but you will see this one happen here. And then if we do get to the river with a hand like this, usually since it wasn't a bluff on the turn, right? Let's say on the turn we ended up betting, what was the option here for ace 10? Half pot or small. I think if we bet half pot, we get to the river. Maybe we're bluffing this on the river. I don't know. This could be a really big bet scenario or a check, but I have to guess. Okay, yeah. So solver's going to turn this into a bluff. So remember we talked about turning like really strong hands into a really big sizing because it's blocking the really strong hands. So you're either jamming this or checking. There isn't that much in between going on here. Yeah, it's an interesting spot to go from turning your hand into a marginal value bet on turn to now bluffing it on the river, because once villain calls the turn, typically they're going to have stronger hands than queen 10, typically. So it's kind of like a catch-22 where it's like a mergy turn bet that maybe we're checking back on some rivers, but it looks like we're bluffing a brick. So it could have been a setup from the turn to always bluff brick rivers. I don't know. This is interesting. If we hit a six of spades, I think we can obviously bet for value for a big sizing. You can see it's like 3x potting the river here. A lot of overbetting today, but very interesting scenarios. So you could argue that maybe it's setting up a river bluff here on the turn instead of a value bet. Since there doesn't seem to be too many turn or river combos that we're checking back. Maybe if the four pairs, we would check this back. Nope. we're still going for the bluff. So yeah, it does look like maybe the solver was setting up a bluff on river. Cool. 885. Next scenario. So before I move on to this one, I just wanted to wrap up that last hand because it is really interesting. I mentioned you can do a couple of things. One of them was look at the equity buckets, and then the other is go through the river scenarios, right? This is what I did after that. I went through all of the different river scenarios. I completed the draw. I put a brick out there. I put a board pair out there. And it looks like even though we looked at the equity buckets and it said that it was a good hand, on the river, it seems that the solver really likes turning this into a bluff, right? So you could then go backwards and say, okay, maybe the solver, if it bets the turn, is setting up the hand for a river bluff if we use the medium sizing. And then if you want to make sure, there's two sizings here, right? Like you could bet small. So maybe if you bet small, the solver is not going to bluff the river anymore because you might be able to beat some weaker hands. So you can actually see the check frequency goes up when we use the small sizing to go to showdown because now we're beating some hands that get to the river. So there's a few things you can do to tell if your hand is in fact a bluff or if it is a value bet throughout a hand. Okay, next hand. 885 flop. King, queen, big blind, gonna check. I think this is just a pretty standard check fold. Actually, I wouldn't mind floating this out of position. It's good to float some broadways out of position so that when obviously a king or queen hits, we have some stronger hands. And villain should have some weaker hands than we are currently holding right now. So they should be betting the flop here with jack high, queen high, even some low suited connectors like 6-7, 10-9, etc. So they're going to have some no-made hands that are worse than this. I don't mind calling on this flop here. Getting to the turn, we're going to be pure checking. And now we probably want to be bluffing our king high on this river. So it's just a matter of what sizing do we want to use, right? Because they could easily check back something like ace jack of diamonds here that would fold to a river bet. So I think king high is going to qualify as a good one to bluff river here. The only question is what sizing do we want to go? We probably don't have to go large in order to get something like ace high to fold. So I think small or medium are both going to be good options here. Man, it'd be great if I could find this small bet bluff here. I'm actually going to go for it. Nice. And then we get snap raised, of course. But at least I found a really good small bet bluff. I think that's one of the harder bluffs to find. But the heuristics behind that is that we aren't really blocking very many strong hands. And we're also targeting hands that could possibly fold, right? So we're targeting ace king and ace queen. So we have bad blockers. Anytime you have bad blockers, you don't have any good removal effects on the flop, turn, or river, you're looking at a small bet most of the time if you're going to bluff. So this is a perfect example of that where we're blocking the folding range. We're not blocking that much value. We are blocking some value, but we're not blocking that much value. And a small bet will get what we're trying to achieve done. So yeah. Thank you very much for the sub. If you guys didn't know, on YouTube, I am live streaming all of these Study Chronicles on Twitch. So if you do want to watch some of these live, I am on Twitch right now, recording it for the future YouTube stuff. So thank you for that sub. Really appreciate it. It also helps support me make all of these videos for you guys. So go check out my Twitch if you haven't yet. Yeah, so we're going to fold here. All right. Next hand, Jack 10-7, cutoff versus big blind. This is going to be a fairly high frequency C bet. Small or medium, both are going to be okay, I think. Let's go with the safe bet and go small. I think that's a safe idea. So again, if you remember, the aggregated reports, small and medium are the safe bet choices, right? So if you can't, make a decision on what sizing, you pick a small or medium size and you won't go that wrong in this scenario. Queen 7-5, going to check. Now this is very similar to that Queen 8 hand that we played on the King board. You could start putting in some bets on the flop here with the intention of bluffing river, because again, we're blocking the strongest King-Queen hand that they're going to have for their top pair. I'm going to check this time, but I don't mind betting turn. Okay, actually, yeah, a little too weak there on this texture to bet this flop. Man, is this just going to be a check down then? It might be a check down and river bluff. Let's try check turn. And definitely going to bluff river here with king high. So again, I think 78 is probably a good size. And villain folds ace high. So great result there. 7-7 deuce, cutoff versus big blinds. We're going to go for a C bet sometimes, mostly check. Going to check this time with a 95. That's a very passive number, so I don't think check is ever going to be a bad play here. Turns an ace. Now, on a turn ace, we can have a small bet. However, this is where I think a lot of players at low and mid stakes get this wrong, is they're not checking back this ace turn strong enough. They're just seeing the ace. They're seeing the ace in their hand, and they're thinking, I have top pair. Now I start betting. But if you want to be balanced and you want to protect your river range, you do need to check back some ace X. The best ace X to check back is going to be the low kickers. So ace 3, ace 4, this is a perfect example of a spot you want to be checking back. So we check back. River's a king, and even though our ace got counterfeit with our kicker now, so we're basically, actually, never mind, I take that back. We had the lowest kicker. We didn't get counterfeit for anything. But what I meant was we're now chopping with any ace on the river. So I'm going to go for the big sizing. That was a mistake. Oh, okay. Maybe small sizing is better. Let's have a look. Interesting. Okay, small sizing would have been better, or even some overbetting. Overbetting, I imagine, is good because it can get some chops to fold. But if we want to get value from an ace here, small bet looks to be a better size. I mean, my sizing wasn't that big of a mistake. Again, like a 0.02 EV difference between small bet and large bet. But in theory, it does make sense. On a board texture like ace, king, 7-7 deuce, what are we going to get value from? Probably a king on the river, or maybe a weak pair. So if that's our target value range, we probably want to use the small sizing. Not a very common sizing to use on the river in a check down pot, but on an ace high board specifically, that kind of makes sense. Also, all of our bluffing hands can cheaply bluff the river for the small sizing. So it is not a bad idea to put in the small bet there. Big blind versus cutoff. This is one of those textures I was talking about that you could lead, and everything is coming together here for a lead. We rolled an aggressive number. I'm going to put the lead in. And we get to the turn. So this is where you can have a bunch of different options. You can have small, medium, or even large and overbets, because we have our entire range at a frequency for leading this flop. So if we had 8-6, what would we do on the turn? Probably overbet. If we had pocket fours on the turn, what would we do? Probably overbet. If we had king 7 of clubs, what would we do on the turn? Probably not overbet, right? So where does this hand fall? Well, we don't have a flush draw, which would be ideal for overbetting here. So if I had something like queen 8 of diamonds, that would be a good candidate for overbetting. But this is just a gut shot. It is blocking pocket 10s and pocket 8s, two strong hands that might call down turn and river. So I could see us continuing to bet here. We have to be careful because keep in mind, we have a lot of our range on the turn again. So we're going to have a lot of better draws for turning our hand into a bluff on the turn. If we're going to bluff this one, I think I like a half pot or large size or check. I think I'm going to go with check, though. I think check is going to be standard. So, again, I think we'd rather use diamonds or something like a 6 or a 3. Those would be much better draws to bluff the turn with. And then on a river king, we might just be giving up here. I feel like this is going to be 100% check. 100% check or a small bet. Because again, talking about not removing hands, this might be a good hand to small bet because we're not going to win with 10 high almost ever here, right? So if that's the case, then it might be worth it to put a small bet in here as a semi bluff. Should we go for it? Let's go for it. It's a learning experience. I think small bet is maybe okay, but most of the time I'm just going to give up here. Yeah, that's a blunder. And we get called by ace jack to add the salt to the wound. But what would have been the right play? Check or medium bet? Okay, so bluff wasn't that bad. We actually just chose the wrong sizing. Medium bet would have been better. I guess we needed to medium bet to maybe represent something a little stronger than I did in order to get ace high to fold. The fact that ace high calls there kind of shows that small bet doesn't really work as well, right? So maybe the medium size makes more sense to get something like ace high to fold. Yeah. Okay. So medium size or check would have been a better option there. My head is blocking. I know that. So let me move this here. You'll see it a little more clearly. There we go. Okay. Back to another scenario. Jack 7-3 versus the big blind. This will be the last one that we talk about. I'm going to try and keep these a little shorter. We've gone over a lot of great heuristics today, so I think that this is a pretty good natural end to this episode. Jack 7-3 board in position. So here's a heuristic for monotone boards. Typically, you want to use the straight draws or the flush draws as your bluffs. So if you have a spade in your hand or if you have a straight draw, that's going to be the next best bluffing hand, because if villain does have a pair, at least you have some outs to a straight. Or if they have, two pair type of hands or even sets, you still have some outs for barreling, flop, and turn. So this is not a bad idea to bluff this hand. We did roll a passive number, so typically you're not going to have a pure bet with anything here on a monotone board. This one's not a bad idea, though, to bet at a high frequency. 9 high, you have the gutter, you block 9s and 8s. It's a pretty good hand. I'm going to go for the safe bet, and I think this is always going to be included in a bluff. So I'm going to go for the small bet. Only 27% of the time, so maybe I, overstated how often you want to be betting here, but this is, again, maybe a good opportunity to bet the turn. So if you're trying to find bluffs on a 4 flush board, it's going to be a straight draw. Because, again, villain is going to have to fold a lot of pairs on the turn. And if they do call some of their pairs or their 2 pairs or their sets, we have some outs. At this stage, you can't bluff a flush because you got it on the turn. So the best bluffing candidate for a 4 flush board is going to be a hand like this. So I'm actually going to go half pot on the turn here. I could maybe also go large bet. And then we get to the river. River is probably going to be an overbet if I had to guess. So I'm going to go for the 150. We're going to really polarize here. We have 9 high. So I'm going to go for the overbet, and you see we got jammed on, but this was actually a pretty cool one to end on. We're going to go into a little bit of a deeper dive, but the overbet was correct given the half pot turn bet. Villain, of course, has the nuts, just like in real life. But let's look at the turn strategy here. So the half pot was incorrect to a degree. The better size would have been small. That makes sense because when the flush does come in, we don't want to necessarily polarize that hard on the turn yet with a hand like this that has some equity but not a lot of equity. I think we would have rather used the half pot or large bet with something like maybe a set, which is like semi-bluffing, right? Or maybe we could have used something that had better removal effects. I don't know. Maybe there is no half pots sizing. Let's have a look. So on the river, or sorry, on the turn, what are our sizing options? Looks like small bet, over bet, medium, and large. So we do have all 4 options here. I guess the 9-8 hand fell into a better small bet category. And then you can actually see the 10-8 is going into the over bet category. So there's something about removing a 10 that's much better than removing a 9. So this is one of those scenarios where, the removal effects have a big impact on your strategy. So maybe removing a 10, just removing some Broadway cards is really valuable, right? So some of the top end of their range for calling the turn are going to be the Broadways with 1 spade, which 10-8 does a good job of removing. So if we're going to choose that polarized bluffing hand on the turn, it is going to be something that removes the top end of villain's range and has a little bit of equity if called. So this is actually a gut shot that does both of those both of those things. So you can see that the draws are typically going to be a gutter here or no draw at all. The no draws, let's see. If we highlight the betting sizes and we filter for the different draws, you'll see that 8-9, 8-6, ace-4, they want to go the small sizing. And then something like the 10-8, these are the gutters. You have something like a pair, so third pair. Third pair is turning itself into a bluff, but again, blocking those important Broadway cards. Ace, queen, king, queen, queen, jack. These are all good cards to be removing in order to bluff our hand. So you're going to see a lot of bluffs on the turn with Broadway kickers if we're going to find those bluffs. 4s is another interesting one. Removing an ace-4 offsuit is also probably relevant here for bluffing, which is pretty cool. Yeah, a little tricky. You kind of have to dig deep for the bluffs in these monotone flops, turn the suit. It does get a little tricky, but the idea, as always, is to remove the top end of villain's range and have a little bit of equity if you can while doing that. So pretty cool spot. I think that will be the last one that we look at. Maybe I just want to see one more thing before I call it quits. So the 8-9, if I did go for a small bet on the turn, as the solver likes to do, would the river still have been a good overbet? I think so. Let's see. Yeah, overbet on the river, still a good play here. 9 high. We found the draw bluff on the turn. We find the overbet on the river. This is something that looks really strong if you're the opponent too, by the way. If you're facing an overbet on a 4 flush board and you're sitting there with like a 6 of spades and you're just thinking this guy never bluffs, well, now you guys know which hands to bluff. All right. That's going to wrap it up for this episode of the Study Chronicles. I really appreciate all of the support that I've been receiving for this series. If you do enjoy it, please click the like button and comment below. If you guys have ever 4x pot jammed the river with queen high, let me know. And I will see you guys in the next episode.